2022. Business is now interrupted to permit the Leader of the Opposition to speak on the Appropriation Bill and Cognate Bills. Before I call the Leader of the Opposition, I remind all members to extend the usual courtesy to the Leader of the Opposition for the budget reply speech to be delivered uninterrupted, as indeed it was for the Treasurer. I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise to respond to the 12th budget from the Liberal and National Government. I do so acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet and determined to walk the path to a treaty with Indigenous people of this state. I do so with respect for those opposite and a deep responsibility to the people of New South Wales. And this week, I want our Parliament and our people to see a serious, constructive debate about our state's future. Mr Speaker, this was meant to be the year the people of New South Wales enjoyed the prosperity of the post-COVID reality. That's why in the darkest days of the pandemic, New South Wales Labor chose to support the leadership of the former Premier, Gladys Berejiklian. We did so in the hope that if we all stuck together and did the right thing, future budgets would be handed down in prosperous times. That was our hope in 2020 and 2021, Mr Speaker, and that was the people's hope. But the reality of 2022 is so very different. Instead, our people face a future of deep uncertainty, of spiralling costs, of slow wage growth, and an ever-growing sense that our economy demands of the many, but only delivers for the few. So just as we did in the pandemic, now in this extraordinary economic crunch, New South Wales Labor stands ready to work with the government on a plan to see the state through. But unfortunately, Mr Speaker, this year things are different. You see, during the pandemic, Gladys Berejiklian had a plan and we were prepared to back it. Now the state has a cost of living challenge, but the budget deals with the Liberals and Nationals' Teals challenge. And after 12 years of Liberal and National government, after 4 Liberal Premiers and 4 Liberal Treasurers, this Premier and this Treasurer have a press release for almost everything, but a detailed plan for almost nothing. Mr Speaker, not everything the other side does is wrong, and there are parts of this budget that I support. I don't want us to go down the American path of destructive partisan politics and undermining trust in democracy. We don't need that here. So I want to say very sincerely that the government's initiative to put $743 million into palliative care is a welcome and important budget announcement. End-of-life care for too long has been a low priority of governments of both political persuasions. But no one should have to suffer in silence. But for too long we've allowed this to happen. Change needed to come, and I congratulate the Premier for this initiative. And the Closing the Gap package to co-design and support locally focused activities is also a welcome shift, and one I hope has long-term financial support in New South Wales. Indeed, it's a crucial step in ensuring that we meet our Close the Gap goals. These are a couple of good things, but I do desperately want the next New South Wales budget to be so much better than this one. And with New South Wales Labor, I know that the next budget can chart a better way for New South Wales. If this were a Labor budget, I'd do 4 things differently. 1, give real, immediate help for household budgets. 2, build and buy things here to grow jobs at home. 3, invest in education like our future depends on it, because it does. And 4, shape the economy to deliver for the many who work hard, not just the lucky few. Here's how. First, a New South Wales Labor government will keep the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Sydney Harbour Tunnel in government hands. On 31 August, the Sydney Harbour Tunnel contract expires. Now, over the years, drivers have paid off the cost of its construction multiple times. But the government has refused to reveal what they'll do with this critical piece of transport infrastructure. Now, why would they do that? Well, we know that the Premier would love to sell this toll road once more along with the Harbour Bridge, so he can boost his credentials as the great asset recycler. I will not. I commit New South Wales Labor to returning that money to toll relief for drivers. The Premier would hand both the Harbour Bridge and Harbour Tunnel over to private operators. Labor will retain them in public ownership and put all that money into toll relief. This budget delivers a boost to the toll revenue of the private tolling companies via a boost to traffic. It's not right. Just as toll companies expect their contracts to be honoured, they should not expect windfall gains from government policy changes. And any windfall gain should be contributed back to the public, back to toll relief. This is just the first part of our plan to ease the toll crunch the Liberals and Nationals have put on the families of New South Wales. With Labor, tolls will always be cheaper than with this privatising, asset recycling Liberal National government. Second, we'll deliver a better and fairer wages deal for our essential workers. Our nurses, police officers, hospital cleaners, all our hard-working public service workers have felt the strain in recent years. They have never been more important. We want better and fairer outcomes for these people. But we're being held back by laws that impose wage suppression. Make no mistake, the New South Wales bargaining system is broken. It's failing to deliver fair wage increases for our essential workers, so we'll scrap it. And we'll replace it with a system based on productivity-based bargaining. Our bargaining laws should reward governments when they cooperate with their workforce instead of confronting them in a courtroom. The law should help us pay these great people what they're worth. It should help us deliver productivity growth for taxpayers, which can be reinvested in better public services. And the wage policy for the New South Wales public sector, a policy which covers 1 in 10 New South Wales workers, should drive wage growth in our economy. Mr. Speaker, this is critical for our state's future. The one thing on the minds of the people of this state right now is the price of everything is going up. Petrol, power, fresh produce, interest rates, inflation, taxes and tolls. We are already the highest taxing state in the country at $4,795 per person per year. Most of us live in the most tolled city on the face of the earth, paying tolls that go up at 4% a year in a good year, except in years like 2022 when they go up 6 or even 8%. And that's, Mr. Speaker, before the current energy crisis when people's energy bills are expected to increase by 18 to 20% next week. My pledge is this: with Labor, government will do what we can to make a difference where the pressure is greatest, starting with tolls, starting next year. Mr. Speaker, how will Labor create more secure, safe and well-paid local jobs? I can announce that a Labor government will back New South Wales jobs with a comprehensive package of measures to get the job done. We'll set a target of 50% minimum local content for future rolling stock contracts by the end of Labor's first term in office. That's to get us where Victoria is. We'll increase tender weightings to 30%, capturing local content, job creation, small business and ethical supply chains to get us where Queensland is. We'll make sure we actually meet Indigenous procurement requirements. We'll set up the New South Wales Jobs First Commission, an independent expert body to oversee the implementation and growth of local industries, supporting local firms as they bid for government tenders, exactly like they do down south. We'll address the skills gap through TAFE manufacturing centres of excellence in the Hunter, in Western Sydney and the Illawarra. Mr. Speaker, we'll redefine value for money to capture wider economic benefits, jobs created, industry development, which has been recommended by the McKell Institute's recent report. We'll collaborate with industry to make our demand pipeline as easy as possible for local suppliers to meet, and we'll enforce reporting and accountability. What suppliers promise, Mr. Speaker, they're going to have to deliver. Finally, in a key signal to the officials who make independent procurement decisions, I'm proud to announce that more and better local jobs will be my first Premier's priority. Mr. Speaker, I believe we should put behind us this crazy cultural cringe that says something made somewhere else must be better and cheaper than something we built in Australia here at home. When did that rule get to be the rule here in Australia? You only have to look at the New South Wales Government's foreign-built disasters, most recently at Sydney Ferries, to see it's complete rubbish. Why wouldn't we use our own? It makes no sense, Mr Speaker. It's simply ideology. I don't understand why Sydney Metro Northwest used steel rails imported from Spain and why the Sydney Convention Centre was built with steel from China. New South Wales has lost 42,000 manufacturing jobs in the same time Queensland's actually gained 6,000. What's more, we've missed out on 4,000 more jobs because these projects were offshored. And training's gone backwards as well. In 2011, 52,000 people completed a traineeship or an apprenticeship. Now that's more than halved to just 22,000 who got their certificate in 2021. Now this hurts private industry. It drives a workforce crisis in the caring economy. Women make up the majority of people in these roles. When New South Wales needs nurses, early childhood educators, social workers, aged care workers, the government has no plan. Just as they've got no plan to create good local jobs, it's got to stop. Mr Speaker, it's this simple really. Aussie businesses and workers can build at home as long as Australian governments buy at home. That's what a state Labor government will do. Mr Speaker, after 12 years of a Liberal and National government, education results haven't gotten better, they've gotten worse. Yet this budget offers nothing for today's learners. Universal preschool is an admirable goal. So why, after this government waited 12 years even to set that goal, do families have to wait another 8 years to actually reach it? By the time the Liberals and Nationals fix kindy, a child born on budget day will be in second grade. And a child born the day the Liberals and Nationals were first elected will have left school completely. Now, Victoria can deliver its preschool goals by 2025. Why do we have to wait until 2030? I think we've already waited long enough. This early investment in education needs to start now. So I can announce that a New South Wales Labor government will build 100 government preschools co-located with primary schools in our first 4 years. Every new primary school should be built with a co-located preschool. Preschool centres should be built and expanded at underutilised schools with vacant classrooms that can be retrofitted, and we can build new preschools on unused land. Where it works, we should also build standalone preschools to create an oasis of learning where there's early learning deserts in our growing towns and suburbs. Now, all this will help deliver universal preschool for 4-year-old children well before 2030. It'll be a huge boost to our children's learning and a huge benefit for the participation of women in the workforce. And Mr Speaker, the flood-impacted communities of the Northern Rivers region shouldn't have to wait. As these schools are rebuilt, they should be built with preschools on site. This is an idea that makes sense, and indeed it doesn't need to wait until the next state election. I urge the New South Wales government to take this idea up right now. Mr Speaker, in New South Wales, only Labor has a plan to help the household budget, to create local jobs, to reset our education system. But the very core of the difference between the parties in this parliament is even more basic than that. Labor believes the economy should work for everyday people. The Liberals and Nationals really think good economic management means more returns for a powerful few. Look at the asset sales of Premier Perrottet and Treasurer Keane, and indeed their predecessors. Eraring Energy, sold for $657 million a decade ago, and now they offer the same company $240 million just to keep it open. Or WestConnex, first sold for around $20 billion, while drivers signed up to pay a whopping $115 billion in tolls, all to private owners. Or Newcastle Port, banned from using it as a container terminal, a huge blow to Hunter businesses who are desperate to diversify their growing economy. The household budget is bleeding from the rising costs to feed private profits. No wonder the independent competition watchdog, the ACCC, has said privatisation without regulations and often with rules designed to prevent them from facing competition makes us all poorer. Yet this government wants to go even further and make it even worse. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, if your water bill was controlled by a private company, just like your power bill or your toll bill? We will make the economy work better for everyone. So I can announce that a Labor government will legislate a ban on the sale of major state assets without the approval of both houses of the New South Wales Parliament. It's clear that this is shaping up to be a major difference between the parties at the next state election. We believe asset sales have hurt the economy. We know that the sale of Sydney Water, Hunter Water and the rail assets would be terrible for our state, and I've got no doubt the people of New South Wales believe this too. Now, making the economy work for everyday people means making the revenue from public assets for public good, not for private gain. And it means using the resources of the state to deliver better benefits for the whole state. In 2022, this has to begin with a plan to rebuild Sydney's west and southwest. Mr. Speaker, the New South Wales lockdown of 2021 was harshest in southwestern and western Sydney. But these areas have been a budget lockdown from this government for a decade. Every single one of our worst serviced public transport suburbs is in Western Sydney. Families move to the west on promises of infrastructure, schools, hospitals and public transport, all of which seems to mysteriously never appear. And the numbers are staggering. 2/3 of our state's growth over the next 20 years will be in Sydney's western and southwestern suburbs. Mr. Speaker, Blacktown will see 200,000 more people move in. Liverpool, 190,000 extra people. Camden, 180,000 extra people. But Mossman, a breezy 999. Now that in itself seems unfair, but to not match it with the urgently needed infrastructure after a decade of neglect, Mr. Speaker, it's just not right. And perhaps where suburban Sydney is paying the highest price of all is in the hospitals. This is the biggest city in Australia, one of the richest countries in the world, and we understand the need for public health as much as any society on the face of the earth. Our hospitals should be sanctuaries. You should arrive in a hospital in Sydney and think, thank God I live in this city. Yes. But we are a million miles from that today. Staff say it's a complete mess. Patients suffer. Our healthcare workers, who entered a noble profession with the singular goal of helping others, are now at breaking point. And it's worst in the places where people are most vulnerable and in many cases need the most help. It is shocking that 4 in 10 critical emergency department patients did not start treatment on time. But it's disgraceful that across the west and southwest, that figure isn't 4 in 10, it's 7 in 10. And would you believe at Blacktown Hospital, it's 8 in 10. Mr. Speaker, it's frightening and it can't go on and it's not fair. This is too important to allow them to keep getting it wrong. Mr. Speaker, the solution is long-term investment in our primary health care, in our emergency departments, in our public hospitals. There should be no repeat of the Liberal and National approach. 12 years of neglect, then a mad election year scramble to hire 7,000 staff, a plan that lasted a day before the Premier began to walk it back. We will not forget southwestern Sydney, we will not forget western Sydney, and of course we will not forget our wonderful, diverse and growing regional communities, beautiful regions, indeed the heartland of our state. Mr. Speaker, look at the Central West. It can be a cradle of renewable energy and opportunity in our state. If we nurture it with local TAFE investment, if we spread the growth by making more of the renewable energy technology right here at home. Or consider the Central Coast of our state. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth. It can be an engine room of economic growth and social opportunity if the government does the right thing. We could do so much more, especially if we partner with local government. All our regions have so much potential to flourish and grow. So we'll do things differently to the Liberals and Nationals, creating jobs in New South Wales through local procurement and domestic manufacturing, ending the obsession of offshoring jobs, training more people for regional businesses, and stopping the gutting of regional TAFE. We'll build infrastructure where the population growth will be, and above all, we'll deliver proper healthcare no matter where you live. Mr. Speaker, we must begin the process of budget repair, and that begins with a solution to the Transport Asset Holding Entity train wreck. So officially, Tahi is a state-owned corporation created by the government, so the accountants could say the cost of safely maintaining our rolling stock and our rail lines wasn't a cost to the budget bottom line. Well, at least that's the theory.
Imagine money.
Maybe it's even the excuse. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is very different. We fear it is a vehicle for privatisation of our train assets.
Yeah, that's right.
We know it risks safety. A key finding from previous rail disaster investigation is that ownership of an asset should not be separated from the government.
Yes.
And we see it leaves our budget far worse off. Now, to try to make it a money spinner, they want to build hotels on top of train lines. Mr. Speaker, it's spinning out of control. It can't go on. To date, this mess has cost more than $25 billion, including a $5.2 billion bailout last year alone. We're on track to lose another $13 billion over the next decade. I'm sick of it, and we'll put an end to it. So I can announce that the Transport Asset Holding Entity will go. New South Wales Labor will consult with rail safety experts on the safe return of our rail assets to Transport for New South Wales and its agencies. Mr. Speaker, we will deliver a sound plan similar to the model previously managed, where rail operators own the assets that they indeed operated. But no matter how much they've splurged, no matter how deep their debt, this government has no mandate to introduce a land tax. There is no need to rush legislation through Parliament in September when there's an election in March. Given the land tax will rise every time property values rise, and a typical Sydney family would start by paying $2,400 each year, every year from next year, at a time when interest rates are set to skyrocket, people deserve to have their say. The Premier says this is a big reform, so we should have a big debate, because there are big questions here. Now, when you examine this proposal seriously, stripped of all the rhetoric of reform, Mr. Perrottet's tax brings great additional complexity to the system without addressing the underlying problem of the balance between tax on income and tax on wealth. And Mr. Speaker, and I think everyone fears this, it leaves the door open for a future Liberal government to extend this tax to everybody. Mr. Speaker, ours is a comprehensive plan. We'll have more to say in the coming months. We will crack down on pork barrelling. The government should adopt our plan. We will legislate for net zero carbon emissions by 2050. In fact, our bill will be voted on straight after this speech. And I look forward to outlining the first steps of our agriculture policy when I address the New South Wales farmers in July. Mr. Speaker, after 4 premiers, 4 treasurers, 12 budgets, the Liberals and the Nationals are going to ask for 16 years in government in March. What the Liberals and Nationals have failed to achieve in 12 years, they won't get done in 16.
Exactly.
And after the last 2 weeks, we can be absolutely certain that Budget 13, 14, 15 and 16 won't fix the problems that Budgets 1 through 12 created, because they don't even have a plan to try. For all those years in office, the Treasurer and the Premier still think they can somehow announce their way into a better future for the people of this state. The future isn't shaped by spin, Mr. Speaker. It's shaped by real measures to reduce the financial burden on families struggling to make the family budget balance at the end of each week. It's shaped by specific government decisions to ensure good, high-paying jobs are part of New South Wales's future, not just a reality for prosperous previous generations. It's shaped by an education system that is reformed and focused on preparing kids for the opportunities of tomorrow, not just patched up with measures to fix the problems of years and years of cutbacks. It's shaped by clear government principles that reject the steady drift towards privatisation, user pays, dog-eat-tog style economy. And Mr. Speaker, the future is shaped by government finances managed with discipline and responsibility, so we build for the next decade, not just the next election. Mr Speaker, I commit New South Wales Labor to work constructively in opposition, whatever the world throws at us in the months to come. But we can only do so much from opposition. When I listen to the people of our state, good, hard-working people, sometimes having a good-natured debate about things that aren't working right, sometimes pouring their hearts out about what a struggle life has become, there's always one question that comes up sooner or later. People ask me, isn't there something you can do to help? And I always say, yes, absolutely. Together we can change the way that this works, but only if we change the government. Only if we turn the page on this government and begin anew, with a government with a real and credible plan. Mr Speaker, the people of New South Wales, all of them, no matter where they live, no matter how they vote, deserve a positive vision. And the key that unlocks that future is to change the government, change our direction. Mr Speaker, there is a better way.
Thank you. In accordance with the resolution of the House of 9 June 2022, I'll now put the question on the second reading of the bill. And the question is that these bills now be read a second time. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Call the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, I move that these bills now